Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to today's session, which is our Future Trends webinar for 2025. We do one of these every year where we basically gather evidence from other sources, from our own data, and also the conversations we've been having throughout the year and put together what we believe the next year is gonna look like. We'll try and keep it to about 20, 25 minutes today, just so we don't overrun to the next time slot, as it were. As you can see, the session's being recorded. If you want a copy of the recording, just send us an email, sales@PharmiWeb.com. You can also submit questions in the chat function. So if you want anything you want to add, pop it in there and we'll do it at the Q&A at the end. We've already got a few questions in, Vince, so I'll tell you those closer to the time.
Okay.
Without much further ado then, let's get started, shall we? So a lot of you will know us all already, but Vince, do you want to do a quick intro to yourself?
Yeah, so I've been a managing director of PharmiWeb now for 27 years. I think we're sort of market leaders, certainly across Europe, and we're starting to grab a strength in the US as well. I think the really good thing about these types of webinars, it makes it really easy for us to turn them into podcasts as well. But we get a lot of information from the management consultancies and their reports, corporate views, industry insights, plus obviously our own data. And because we're getting so much data now, it's making this a lot easier to do. Just give people a sort of finger in the air as to what we think next year is going to look like and how it might affect you and your businesses. So that's over from me. Simon.
Yeah, my name's Simon. If you don't already know me, I've been working at PharmiWeb now for about 5 years. I spend all day, every day talking to clients, both from recruitment agencies, from life science companies, direct hiring companies, and I've basically just been able to pull together a load of evidence to put into these slides. So hopefully you find it quite informative. Let's see what's on the agenda for today then, Vince. So we're going to go over a few different bits. We're going to do a kind of geographical roundup. We're going to talk about different parts of the planet and kind of what things are looking like as far as they're concerned. We're then going to talk about upskilling recruitment and TA teams because that's pretty hot for the next sort of 6-ish months. Doing more with less, it's an increasing theme in business, but I don't think I've ever seen it quite as prominent as it is right now. We'll talk a little bit about AI, everyone's absolute favorite subject, hybrid working, a little bit around salaries, and then finally finishing on with everyone's other favorite subject, politics. So, moving first and foremost to geography, Vince, I'll let you handle this one because you've done quite a lot with this lately, haven't you?
Yeah, so what we're seeing at the moment is growth is starting. So, I mean, I think we've all had a fairly bad year. I think next year we'll start to pick up probably around February, March. So Q2, I think, is going to be the best time. And we're seeing growth start in the US. It's fairly stagnant, to be honest. It's fairly stable, but it's not really doing anything. California's still doing okay. LATAM is starting to grow, so we're looking at Mexico, Colombia, and Brazil as the main hotspots. And our next launch will probably be in Mexico because that's looking like a really interesting hub for us. Africa is starting to become really interesting as well. A lot more clinical trials being done out there, a lot more companies trying to get a footprint. South Africa probably being the most active part of that as the mainstay. India, mainly for IT. Most CROs have now got a footprint over there. Some pharma companies are starting to look at it from a manufacturing point of view as well. But it's a fairly young industry from a employee point of view, so that makes it a little bit more difficult. But really where we're going to see some action, I think, is going to be EMEA. So I know a lot of US companies are looking at Europe now as a launch platform, primarily because it's getting quite expensive in the US. DAC region obviously being one of the biggest ones. UK, Spain, France, Nordics, Portugal, Bulgaria, Eastern Europe are all making plays to win as many clinical trials and as much work as they can. Probably the biggest one being Spain. And if you look at Barcelona, they're trying to make that really, really cost effective. The one that's not on there, of course, is Ireland. And I think a lot of companies have looked at Ireland and Dublin especially. But the problem there is the amount of people there from a workforce point of view. You know, it's very difficult to bring people in. It's very difficult to develop your business, especially around Dublin, when there's no, new building taking place or very little
Mm.
that's actually going to make a difference. I think one of the consultants I spoke to said they should be looking at, building 1 million homes, but they're certainly not going to do that. So I think Ireland's going to be quite difficult if
Mm.
people move there. So we're going to see a lot of these other companies picking up. I think Spain and France will pick up a lot Even the Nordics are actually putting a lot more money into winning pharma companies, life sciences, discovery units and clinical trials, and they put up more money than the UK has to actually sort of bring people in. And the other one that's not on here, of course, is Australia. So Australia is really bidding hard to get more clinical research, more pharma companies, and more discovery and biotechs over in Australia. So we'll see how that goes. Again, problems in Australia is the actual ecosystem over there to actually build anything. So that's what I'm sort of seeing. On top of that, there's going to be probably a lot more friendshoring, offshoring, warehousing, and logistics support, and a number of companies all working as a group to try and utilize the resources that are available in the most effective way. And this is all about being agile, being flexible, thinking about what you're doing and planning ahead and working with organizations to actually make these things happen. So I think things are hotting up. I think it's going to take a little while just to sort of really get going, but certainly by Q2, if I had to put money on it, that would be the time that I think things are really going to start going again.
Solid roundup. Yeah,
Yeah,
I think
I
it's a
thought
really,
so.
really, yeah, you've been practicing that one. Yeah, it's a really good look at everything. And I think particularly what we're seeing about Latin America, I think is for me, it's probably the really most interesting part geographically for next year. I'm really interested to see what they do, particularly where the Northern American landscape is now somewhat uncertain. Really interested to see what happens there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So something again that we've been talking about quite a lot, more so over the last few weeks than anything else, is the upskilling that recruitment and TA teams need to do, isn't it? You were having a conversation with someone quite recently about this, weren't you?
Yeah, so I work quite closely on AI because I'm watching it to see exactly what it's doing, and there's some good things and bad things. We'll talk about both as we go through this. So, talking about some of the tools first of all, if some of you are not using them, what we're trying to do is to get industry standard tools, because the speed that AI is developing, there's no way you'll be able to keep up with them. So the key thing is having tools that we all know or people all know and you can use them. So things like TalkWalker and Awario for social media listening, which is really useful to actually find out what's going on there. Testify for candidate verification, HireView for assessment tools, video infused process management, that type of thing. If they start to become industry standard, that's going to make it a lot easier. And we've recently done a podcast on this, which is up on our site now, where I'm chatting to Ross from Icon, who's fairly knowledgeable on what's going on out there.
Mm.
We're constantly monitoring what's hot and what's not, including what's going on with the new talent acquisition tools that LinkedIn are actually going to be putting into the market as part of your packages to you that are actually using it. So keep an eye on those, but be the master of one rather than none, because with the speed of AI, you're looking at 10 times faster than you can learn it. So it's all about find the one that fits where you are right now, think about future planning, and then absolutely master that tool that you've got and make sure you use all the components of it. So that's pretty much my view on AI. Simon, you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, so when we're talking about the upskilling of recruitment teams and how they're leveraging all of these tools, what we're finding is that people are reporting that they've got more time back in their day, which is no big shock to anyone at all. But it's what they're doing with that time. We've looked into this quite in depth, and we've realized that there are things that people need to be doing to make sure they stay competitive. And I hate the word very much, but relevant. A lot of people when AI first started making its footsteps were concerned that recruiters and TA folk just simply wouldn't be needed anymore. I think a few years in, we can say that that's hogwash. I think it's always going to need people. It's always going to need humans in a process that involves hiring humans. Who would have thought? But there are skills that we need to develop to make sure that we stay ahead of the curve. And some of the ones that we've identified, data analytics, being able to read the data that comes out of these tools and these platform, make a strategy going forward and implement it is going to be a really key skill for anyone working in talent right now. Also things like sales. If you're a recruiter, AI is never going to be able to go out and get you new clients. We've all seen AI generated emails. They're abysmal, right? So we need to get really, really good at our sales skills and constantly keep sharp. Communications and problem solving and leadership, these kind of soft skills that, they're on most people's CV anyway, but now's a really good time while we've got that spare time in the day. provided that we have got it because of all these tools, now is a really good time to look at these. And then finally, personal branding. Even to a certain extent, tools like Pager, they've made it really easy to automate your personal branding. So, if you have a platform, if you have a following, now is a really, really good time to work on that. Put some dedicated time every day to creating original, thought-provoking content. As we've sort of touched on a few times, the role of the recruiter is very much changing now. It's evolving to a completely different thing. What do you think on that, Vince?
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think I've done a lot of work recently around skills-based employees and what you need to do to upskill, reskill, whatever it is, to make your own employees um, better. That you can actually then look at, moving around internally, thinking about changing the way that they think. We're going to cover this a little bit further on, but I think you need to know more about more things. We're all suffering from time, even though we've got more time. So what are we actually doing with it? And it's actually figuring that out, really. So I think a lot of companies are going to be really thinking about how do we deploy the assets that we've got, and the assets are your skilled individuals internally.
Agreed. Agreed. Doing more with less, as I sort of said earlier, it's always been something that's been quite prominent. People always want to have a healthier profit margin. They always want to try and find tools that aren't performing very well and cut them. But I don't think I've seen anything quite like it before, like this year, Vince. What about you?
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think the key one for me this year is that a lot of companies have rethought about their tech stack, what they're spending their money on.
Mm.
A lot of companies are having to cut back, they're having to think. A lot of companies are thinking about where they're going in the future and when things are going to turn around. So I think the biggest one that I've seen is, comments from people saying that, we're writing this year off, we're going to make it as bad as we possibly can. Or people saying, yeah, this year's not been too bad, so we're going to make the most of it that we can. Either way, they're all pausing just to take a breath and see where they're going next. And there's a whole range of different things that we're looking at here. I mean, the biggest one for me around do more, meaner, leaner is thinking about if you've got this huge tech stack of stuff that you don't actually use, stop paying for it, get rid of it, and go back to what you know best. Get these industry standard tools that you need. Think about one of the comments I saw recently from a management consultancy saying that they estimated within 5 years there'll be 20% less talent acquisition staff because we won't need them because of AI. I don't believe that, because you still need to go through that information. You can get AI to do a lot for you, but at the end of the day, going back to what you were saying earlier, I think the biggest thing out there at the moment is humans talking to humans. Stop messaging, actually talk to people. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that. So I'm starting to see a lot of courses coming out again now, of people actually teaching people how to talk to people again, how to communicate again, the things that you need to do. And we'll talk about that a little bit further on as well.
Yeah, sure. One of the more common things that I'm seeing this year are people having to strip down the platforms that they're using. So, you think of a agency, for example, they might have a load of LinkedIn licenses. They'd have job portals like PharmiWeb, Indeed, Monster, Total Jobs, all of them. Yeah, and they can have the same messaging, same jobs on each of these platforms. What I'm seeing is it's now really, really stripped down on a lot of companies where they've got, LinkedIn's pretty much a non-negotiable for everybody, but LinkedIn and then just one platform. A lot of the conversations we've
Mm.
had with existing clients has been around, weighing up the options. Do we go with just loads of applications, to make the numbers look healthy from a generic site? Do we use a niche platform? And they have to really think about it more than they've ever thought about it. And one of the things that we say to all of them is whatever you choose, make sure you maximize everything that you're paying for. One thing that we're all absolutely guilty of, and I say this as someone who's responsible for tech within FarmiWeb as well, it's not utilizing everything that we pay for, absolutely every single thing. So speak to your account managers and make sure, if you can have your job scraped, you're having them scraped. Make sure you've got your CV alerts set up. Make sure you've got all of these things working for you so you don't have to do that work. That's how you
Mm.
maximize the few tools that you have, isn't it?
Yeah, so I think with going back to LinkedIn, I think LinkedIn's actually really good. I think they need to define who they are. They're starting to really make some inroads into restricting what's actually going on LinkedIn, but they are releasing some really good tools. The biggest shock I think this year was finding out, I think that, the average price increase on LinkedIn was 24% this year. If everyone thinks they can afford 24% every year, then, think again. So be aware of those sort of catch outs, really.
Yeah,
Okay,
they've
let's move on
got a
to the next one.
monopoly, haven't they, for sure?
Absolutely.
So AI, obviously you touched on a fair amount of this a minute ago, but looking at some of the other points here, I think one of the things that we're seeing is there's a constant barrage of new tools and new tech, isn't there, to a point
Mm.
where it's really hard to keep up, which is why it's really useful when you listed a load that people are using and actually getting a good result from. I think those referrals are kind of making the world go round because if you just research AI tools that do candidate screening, you're inundated. How are you possibly meant to make a good informed choice, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this is going back to this tech overload I was talking about. We're all getting too much. It's
Mm,
taking too much time, which is why people are working on it. The stuff that's starting to become industry standard will be industry standard because, a lot of companies are using it, and that's what I'm finding.
mm,
Um, and it's how do you actually deploy those? Because recently I had a meeting with a group of CROs, and we were talking about their tech stack. And when you start talking to people, all of a sudden people putting their hand up saying, well, I didn't know it could do that. I didn't know it could do that. I didn't know it could do that. So no one's actually using all the functionality. And even the top users suddenly found out there's bits that they weren't using.
mm.
So, these tools are great, but master them before you jump on to the next one, because there'll be another one in 6 months' time. And I
Yeah.
think going back to what I was saying, the AI is moving so fast with these tools and they're so good. You actually need, if you don't already have it, an expert or someone that you can go and talk to about some of these tools who can actually look at them, think about how they actually work, what do they do and what can they bring to the business before you buy them in and actually use them. So I think a lot
Mm,
of companies are spending a lot of time on AI, but what's it actually doing? Can you use it fast enough to make a difference? So there's a whole range of different things there around AI. The
mm.
um, the other thing that you've got on here, Simon, which is another one that most people are worried about, is the internal training needs to be prioritised for all employees on new technology. Because again, you can't just deploy the technology, then people don't know how to use it, and it
Yeah.
might take a year or 18 months for people to get up to speed. Well, that's a long time nowadays. Things are moving too fast.
Way
So I
too
think
fast.
we're going to see a lot of new training companies set it up. I think a lot of companies are going to be using those companies to actually keep their teams up to speed with what's going on. So it's a big issue, that one, because it's going to cost a lot of money and time. So
Yeah.
I think with all these things, it is a barrage. Talk to people, find out what the industry standard is. If you're not sure, you can always come to us because we're always very much in touch with what's going
Mm,
on in the market. We can give you some pointers. There's normally always 2 or 3 different things that you can try, but just go with one, because actually trialing something and implementing something is a lot of hard work. So
mm.
do the thing that everyone else is using. So it goes back to, if we went 10 years ago and people saying, oh, can you use Word? And everyone said, oh, yeah, yeah, we can.
Yeah,
But they
it's
didn't,
true.
So
Yeah.
it's that type of thing again.
Yeah, it is
Okay.
very similar. One thing worth mentioning is Corn Ferry did their report quite recently for, trends and what the future looks like, and AI was the standout thing on that. They spoke to I think the number was near on 1,000 professionals across different industries, to be fair, around recruitment, and they said 67% of them said that AI is probably going to be the biggest focus for their
Mm.
organization next year, and that encompasses every element of it. It's using it, implementing it, buying it, training on it. So I think it's a big thing still, but I don't think it's been as damaging to recruitment as we thought it would be.
No, I'd agree with that. The biggest one for me is, people are all using the AI now, but talking to a lot of the big pharma companies are saying, well, look, that's because we're all industry professionals. We've got good experience, been around for a long time, millennials especially. What happens when
Mm.
you bring the new people in? What about the new graduates that are coming into the business now? They don't have any of that.
No, it's true.
So where
It's
are they
true.
going to get it from? You know.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's another story.
Interesting times, huh? Hybrid working, and it feels insane to still be talking about this, 4 years on, hence the picture I've chosen. But it's still very much a big part of the conversation. Those who don't No, I guess hybrid working is very much the favored method these days. With 75% of people currently in the UK alone working in that way, and the benefit of hybrid is it is a wonderfully broad term. It can mean a day in the office, 3 days in the office, 4 days in the office. It's completely flexible in that regard. But it is what most people are used to doing. Return to office is still really big on the agenda. I know, Vince, you've been speaking to a few large pharmaceutical companies who need bodies in the office. It's not a want, it's not a culture thing. It's a need. It's part of their portfolio. So it's quite an interesting thing.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the concerns with hybrid working are that, everyone loves it. Let's face it, we love working from home. Anyone that's worked in an office for 20 years can't wait to get into working from home. The problem you've got is a lot of the big pharma companies are worried. They're worried about their people. They're worried about, career structure. They're worried about socializing people again because we're all becoming a little bit siloed.
Mm,
So I think what we're going to see is a lot of companies, especially the big pharmas, going to the 3-2 rule and get people back into the office because they want them to learn management skills. They want them to be, get their training done. They want it for their well-being. Working from home is very unsocial and it doesn't help. You get your business skills if you're actually working with people. Now you can do that online, but I think a lot of them want to get it back in. And when we're looking at reskilling and upskilling people and their social
mm,
skills, it's an absolute no-brainer. However, home-based, most people are actually more productive, but they're lonely. So
mm.
you've got that well-being, how are people feeling? Can you tell if they're starting to, start to break down or feeling stressed? You don't know that anymore. We don't have the water cooler moments where we're talking to each other. You also don't have those little moments when you're passing on information or when you're skilling someone without them even knowing, talking about a problem that you wouldn't do if you were online. And this is
Mm.
why a lot of companies are thinking, yeah, the hybrid way is probably the way to go. If we can get people into the office 3 days a week, they can work from home 2 days a week, whatever it is, that's probably going to be a good way of doing it because now people can interact again. So getting people going back to what they know is good. And home based isn't good for, developing business skills, because
No.
you're on your own. You need to interact with people. So all those things we still need to do. And as I
Yeah.
said, the other thing, of course, is with new generations, we've got a couple of people in our own office, Simon, that have never worked in an office. They've never been in that environment. They've only ever worked in their kitchen. Well, that's
Yeah.
it. Okay. So how does that stop you being siloed? How does that give you the social skills to interact? How does that allow you to learn?
It
Well, you
doesn't.
can learn, but it's not the
Mm.
same as actually being there, especially when it comes to conflict management, verbal messaging. It's all right sending a text to someone or sending an email, but actually interacting with a human is a completely different thing. So this is why
Mm.
we're seeing, the return to office big on the agenda because the industry wants to stay first class. To stay
Yeah.
first class, you need the business skills.
It's true.
Quite simple.
It's true. So we occasionally do surveys of the candidates on PharmiWeb, and at the moment, we've got near on 600,000 users set up. Not all of them take part in our surveys, but 67% of the respondents have said that flexible working is a non-negotiable for their next hire. So it's definitely something that we still need to be thinking about, but something that we'll cover, a little bit later is the true meaning of flexibility is very personal, I guess, isn't it?
Hmm.
It's not a one size fits all solution. Salaries, just very, very quickly to touch on this. I think for the most part, we're seeing that they're quite stagnant. A lot of people are reporting that they haven't received what they would call a significant rise in the last 2 years. A couple of in line with inflation salary increases, but nothing significant like we saw over COVID. And this is because, when we had that big return to work um, period sort of between 21, 22, people were job hopping like crazy, weren't they? Getting 5, 10, 15 grand pay rises for doing very much the same job. The competition was rife. We're not really seeing that anymore. And I think things are kind of leveled out. I would say leveled out is probably the correct term to use in this. We are seeing that some sort of really specialized focus areas, particularly across things like data management and data analytics, they're still incredibly competitive on salaries to a level that, we're used to seeing at this point. But everything else is very much the same. And reskilling and internal mobility, people are looking into this now more than ever to try and get onto a different career path that has a better financial incentive, aren't they?
Yeah, well, again, this is something that I think a lot of companies are looking at for 2025. So the first thing is, expectations on salary, um, support packages, training, promotion, benefits, they're too high.
Mm,
We've as an industry, we've set ourselves up to fall, and we can't manage it, we can't afford it, and that's because if you think about what's going on in the world, we've had a lot of politics, a lot of issues there. We've got wars going on, we've got the economy
mm,
being bad, technology's growing, and everyone's got to think about the cost of that, cost of running the business, new taxes, everything is hitting us all at the same time, which is why we've had a really bad year. We've had the worst year I've seen in 30 years working in the life sciences sector.
mm,
Never seen one like this before. So there's been no precedent. And this is why we've sort of got ourselves in this position. And again, we're going to see a lot more in the future, people thinking about what does the business need moving forward. So if we're looking at internal mobility, we need to, refocus, reskill our own internal teams, make sure they're actually better employees for us that we can deploy in different places. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that going on, which will really help,
mm.
rather than having to bring people in and buy people into the business because that's expensive. And that's when all your salaries go out of kilter and everything else. So every company is going to be looking at this. Every organization is going to be looking at this and thinking, what do we need to do to actually move forward? And I think, this is critical over the next sort of 6 months for people to decide that. If some companies haven't made that strategy now, some of the bigger ones, then, they're on the road to hell, unfortunately, because it's not going to work. They should have already done this, and that's my
Agreed.
view on it at the moment. It's a tricky one.
Mm, it is. It's a really hard one. Probably not quite as hard as the political landscape, though. I think we've seen the most significant political year probably in my lifetime. We had three very, very big things happen. We had the US election, we had a shift in power in the UK, and then we've had the European Parliament as well. Three really, really big things happening right on top of each other. It's been significant, probably doesn't cover it, but let's kind of review what's happened and what that could mean. Let's start with the US because they do, you know, they do kind of run most things, don't they? It does all
Yeah,
start there. So obviously Trump won. But his health secretary choice has kind of caused a little bit of commotion. For those that don't know, who aren't up to date with this kind of stuff, he's brought someone on who is a known vaccine skeptic, which never really helps life sciences, particularly not when it comes to investment. And what we saw on the day of him doing that was stocks falling. And this is interesting because the day that he actually won the election, stock markets went up immediately. A fair few percent across life sciences. They've all fallen again, lower than they were at the time. So that's a really interesting choice. And now we're seeing news about what he plans to do with tariffs, particularly importing from China. He wants to add something like an extra 60% on, and that's going to go down to the patient, to the recipient, the bottom line. So it is a really interesting economical time for life sciences in the US. With the UK budget, which has become somewhat infamous, there was some nods to investment into life sciences, particularly across R&D and biotech startups, but that's been completely dwarfed by Asian and US investment. It's really nothing to write home about, sadly. Um, Good news out of Europe. The European Parliament's really keen to invest in life sciences and become competitive again. It got an EPP majority, and what basically they've planned to do is put as much money as possible to make Europe a center of excellence for clinical trials again. They note that they've lost 6% of all of the work that's come out basically since 2012, which is billions of euros. It's not a small amount of money, and they want to get that back. So they are going to be investing. And as we touched on earlier with the global geography update, Spain is a really, really front runner for clinical trials in Europe. That's only going to get better with any luck. So, summarizing everything up, then, Vince, these are probably the big takeaways, the big things to write
hmm
home about. Recruiters and TA teams, they need to upskill and reskill and move with the times. We've got to get really, really good, not only at what they do as a day job, which is recruiting and bringing people in, but also those other skills that run parallel, the data management, the leadership, the sales, all of these things that they need to do is a really hard time to be in recruitment because you signed up to do one job and now you're suddenly being asked to do many, many others. The political landscape, we've just touched on it. Really, really interesting. Salaries, we touched on that a minute ago. Stagnant. I'm hoping to see improvements next year because, that'll be good for everybody. Hybrid working is still the front runner in terms of working habits, but return to office is definitely looming. I think it hasn't been as threatening as we expected. It's probably going to take a little while to tell what the full-time implications are, but certainly I don't think it was as tragic as we were all thinking it would be back in 2022. But I think the key theme, the big thing here is utilizing less tools. Budgets are tighter than ever, but actually utilizing them properly, doing it properly, automating everything, getting the most out of them is going to be the key for success in 2025. So questions, I guess. I've got a few here, and I'm very conscious of the time. So if you do need to jet off and you want a copy of this recording, you want to see what happens in a minute, just send us an email, sales@PharmiWeb.com, and I'll make sure you get those the rest of the recording as well as these slides. But Vince, I'm going to start with a couple of the questions that I've got in the inbox. If you have anything you want to add, now's the time. Click the chat button, chuck it in there, and I'll get it asked. The first question, Vince, is what do agencies need to do to diversify?
All right, well, that's an interesting one. I think the agencies, when you're looking at recruitment agencies for the industry, I think they need to start to diversify their portfolio. So do a little bit more rather than just stay with the same things. If your recruiters out there, more of an RPO type style, because I think there's going to be peaks and troughs in recruitment that come faster than they've ever done before. And being able to step in and actually support talent acquisition teams is going to be a really good thing to do. So really good experienced people, I think, will still be used, and that makes a big difference. And I think the reason for that being, I think a lot of companies for the next 2 years really are going to go more for recruiting the right person for the role rather than the best person. Because the right person for the role is the right person that's going to suit the culture of a company, your identity, what you're actually doing, but also someone that you can develop and keep for longer. Keeping someone just for 2.6 years, which is the average we've got at the moment, isn't long enough to make it worthwhile, bringing that person on board. I think days of chopping and change people are starting to move away. I think we're starting to really think about the people we employ. So yeah, and I think that's probably the biggest one. But the other one is working quite closely with consultants, with their clients around data. The data is the key. You've got the data. Everyone's got the data now. I've got so much data, it's coming out of my ears. Use that data to make rational decisions rather than shooting from the hip. And I think learning to use the data and rationalizing what you're going to do, which will help you move forward in the future, is a really good thing to do. And I think a lot of talent acquisition teams will start to use data to go back to the hiring managers and talk about, well, look, here's the data. You're saying you need this, but do you actually really need someone like this? Should we upskill this person or this group of people to actually be able to do that as well, so that we can cover this when it happens? So I see a lot more of that going on. Hopefully that's answered that question.
I think so. Yeah, I think it's pretty concise. The next one I've got here, what do personalized career paths mean? Did you did we touch? We must have touched on it, otherwise they wouldn't ask. But yes, what do personalized career paths mean?
Okay, so going back to that upskilling and reskilling thing, a lot of companies are looking at and bringing management consultants into the organization to actually talk about career paths and where's your career go to an individual level. So what sort of development needs you need? Your career path's not going to be A to B to C to D anymore. It could be A to B, let's go to X, then come back to C, and then do D, and then do M. So you're going to change a lot in your career. You're going to have more options, and this is where the reskilling and upskilling comes in, and better training. So you might have someone that wants to go to more of a management role. You might have someone else that wants to go to more of a subject matter expert. They will be given that opportunity. So that type of skills-based selection is working out who's best for the job and what they're going to do in the future, then training them appropriately, but no longer keeping them on a linear path. And that's what I was really talking about on that.
Excellent. Last question here. Again, if you have any more that you want asked, just put them in the chat function. I'll get them done. What are the top 3 things that companies are doing to keep motivation high after what we'd call a bad year?
Okay, well, I know this one because just talking to someone about it this morning.
Yeah.
Micro promotions become one of the in things. So a lot of the companies now doing promotions every 3 months, micro promotion to, whether you've got a new skill set, you've done a training session, whatever it might be, because, with the workforce now, managing this multi-generational workforce, you've got to think about keeping them motivated, keeping them going in the right direction, doing the right things to stop them wanting to leave and go somewhere else. Don't lose those skills because of that. Face-to-face management meetings, I think, has become the norm now. So rather than sort of meeting someone on Teams, unless you're remote and you're on an international stage, people actually physically getting together and having their management meetings and going for a walk in the woods, that type of thing. So you address two things at the same time. From a well-being point of view, that allows you to assess those people and, see if they're okay, they're not depressed, they're not overloaded, they're not stressed. That sort of thing makes a difference. And then really talking to people about this skills-based development. And the people that are doing that are better management people for multi-generation people. So, not old school management, people that can understand what people's needs are and where they're going in the future. They're the sort of things I think that companies are deploying.
Yeah, I'd say those are probably the biggest ones for sure. There's no further questions, so I'll move on to the final section, which is basically just where we talk about the webinars that we have done this year. Now, all of these are on our website, on our webinar library, or if you see one here that you particularly want, ping me an email and I'll just send it to you, make your life a little bit easier. But we've tackled a load of subjects over the last few years. And for those that prefer podcasts, I don't know if you've seen, we now have a podcast, the PharmiWeb podcast. Again, it's findable on our website and you can find it on Spotify as well. We have just released another episode, which is actually about tech. So all of that stuff we covered in the AI section. Vince listed a few bits of software. A lot of those we speak about in good depth on that podcast. So please do go ahead, have a listen, follow the PharmiWeb podcast, and support that. Vince, is there anything else you want to add?
No, I don't think so. I think we've tried to cover as much as possible there. I think come Q2 we'll be starting to really pick up, which is going to be good. I think everyone deserves that. But I suppose as this is our last webinar of the year, let's hope everyone has a great Christmas and go and enjoy it, because it's been hard work. And we're not used to it. So yeah, it's normally more fun than this. So thanks everyone for attending.
Sure. Thank you, everyone. You enjoy the rest of your day, and we will see you in February next year, where we'll be back with the next podcast soon to be announced. Thanks for coming. If you need the slides, if you want the recording, just email us, sales@PharmiWeb.com. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Ben.